So today we're going to be talking about how exactly we can set boundaries, um, because it can really seem like difficult to really know where and when we should actually set them. Like, what are the situations um, where we need to set them, and how do we set them when we're in these situations? Um, and you can feel free to send me an example of a situation that you would wonder how you could set a boundary in also, as you're listening to this discussion here. Last week we actually talked about forgiveness, and it was a good discussion, but it can be very difficult to forgive if we're holding grudges and we're feeling resentment, and likely we may be experiencing resentment if we don't set good boundaries. So if you're the kind of person that's allowing others to constantly take advantage of you and to get away with things that they really shouldn't be able to get away with, the results are that you're feeling more and more building resentment. And that is not a good thing. If you're building resentment and holding grudges, it can make it very difficult to forgive. So, in order to get yourself on the right foot, or start yourself off on the right foot, what you want to do is know how to set healthy boundaries right away, so you don't have to start to resent people. Because when you're in the mode of constantly people pleasing and doing the most for everyone, you're trying to high achieve and make sure everyone likes you and make sure everyone's happy and manage everyone's emotions, and it puts you in a position to exhaust yourself, to burn out. But it also puts you in a position to be taken advantage of. And so people who aren't even necessarily abusers don't have a clear sense of where your boundaries are. Like, they don't know when you get tired, um, or when what they're asking for is actually too much. So to that end, you have to know where to actually set the boundary. But how can you know this? Well, setting boundaries is really taking care of oneself. Um, this is not so hard when you think about it in terms of how you would take care of a child. So some of you here are parents already, and some of you here are not parents. So I'd like you to just imagine with me, if you will, that you do have a child that you're taking care of. Can you picture your child? Now, if you're the parent of this child, what gives you the authority to set rules for that kid? What actually gives you the authority? Why are you the boss, the person who can set rules for that child? Well, doesn't it have something to do with the fact that since you have to take care of the child, since the child is your responsibility and their safety is your responsibility and their well-being is your responsibility, then you must have the authority to set rules and to set boundaries for that child. Does that sound about right? Because if you don't have the authority to set rules and to set parameters for that child, then you can't take care of the child. So you see how actually setting rules and setting boundaries is synonymous with caretaking? You can't truly care for something if you don't have authority over it. You have to be given authority in order to care for it. So as a parent, you have the authority to set rules. So how do you set rules for your child? How do you decide, like, what needs to be a rule? Is it just based on your feelings that day? How do you set rules for your kid? What do you base it on? Likely, when you think about it, the rules that you're setting for a child are based on what's best for the kid, right? You're always looking out for what's best to keep it safe from danger and also to help it to advance. So you might have rules like, for certain age children, no playing in the street or be home by a certain time. Those are safety based rules, right? Those are there to help the child to remain safe. You may also have rules to help them to advance, such as no video games before you're done with your homework, and you have to eat your vegetables. Rules like that are to help the child to grow and to become better, right? So you have rules to protect them and you have rules to advance them. So what would happen if you're not consistent with your rules? If you're a parent, and even if you're not one, just imagine you are. If you're a parent, you have a kid, but you're not consistent with your rules. So sometimes they can play video games as soon as they get home, and other times you get really mad when they play video games. Or sometimes they can go out and play in the street, and then other times you go crazy and you get mad when they're playing in the street. What would happen if you're inconsistent? Doesn't it really undermine your authority? It's kind of confusing to the kid, right? If you're not consistent, it confuses the child. So the child doesn't know what to expect. And other people don't know what to expect as well. So if no one knows what to expect, then this can lead to the child just giving up altogether or developing anxiety because they never know when it is that they need to do something or not do something in order to keep you happy. So this can really create an environment that keeps the child in an anxious state. So you wouldn't want to be inconsistent, right? Would you ever just punish your kid without having given it any prior warning that what they were doing was unacceptable? So let's say they didn't know, like let's say you have a laptop sitting on the table and they go on the laptop and they just touch a couple keys on it, or they try to check their email on it, and then you come in and you're like, you are grounded. Would you ever do that? And they say, well, I never knew I couldn't touch this. I'm sorry, I wouldn't have touched it. No way, you're grounded. You're grounded. Did you ever do that? Or do you think you would first establish to them, let them know, hey, I'm warning you, I don't want you to touch my laptop. That's a rule. You think you would let them know that ahead of time? Or do you think you would just come out of nowhere with a punishment? Of course, you would warn them, right? You would let them know. You might even give a couple warnings. Make sure that it's very clear. You would communicate your expectations with the child, right? You're communicating your boundaries. How do you do that? How do you actually communicate your boundaries to a child? How do you let them know what's right and what's wrong? Well, you're going to speak to them, right? Probably at first calmly. Isn't that best rather than just yelling? So it's actually going to be really calm, kind of chill how you explain things to the child. And you're going to say things like, hey, look, my laptop, wherever I leave it in the house, I don't want you to touch it, but you have your own tablet that we got for you. You can touch that. Now they know the boundaries. Oh, okay. They know what's expected of them. I can touch my tablet, can't touch mom's laptop. Good. So it's communication. You're just telling them, right? You just do it calmly. Isn't that how you would do it? Just let them know. Uh, just so you know, before you go out tonight, I expect you to be home by 11. Just letting you know. You're just going to say it calm, right? So you can communicate boundaries to your children. You tell them the rules just by using your voice. Or you could put it down in writing, right? Some moms have like a chore chart on the refrigerator. Okay, Wednesdays are dishes. That's what you got to do on Wednesday. So the kids know it's in writing. It's right there. You might send a text message, email, something where it's clear they can see it. And that's how you would establish it, right? What if their friends came over and you have a rule in your house that's for their friends too, that applies to their friends, like no shoes in the house. So would you be afraid because it's not your kids anymore? So like, oh no, I can't tell these kids what to do. Would you do that? They come in your house, they got dirty shoes, they just walk all over your carpet. You would just leave it just like that? Probably not, right? You probably would tell them clearly, hey, uh, the shoes, we don't do that here, not in this house. You guys got to take your shoes off. You can take them off by the door. You can leave them right there, and then you guys can go play. You'd communicate the boundaries, wouldn't you? You see how this kind of starts to illustrate a bit how we can establish boundaries for ourselves? You see, we tend to have a double standard. As trauma survivors, we may feel like we know how to take care of another person. But then when we get hit with the, hey, you should take care of yourself, we're like, uh-huh, sure. And then it's like in one ear and out the other. Like, what did he even mean by that? Take care of myself? How do I take care of myself? And we might get an image of like us in a bubble bath. Like, I don't think that's gonna solve my trauma. I don't know why I need to take a bubble bath. And we give up. We give up on the concept of self-care. But when we illustrate it with a child, it's like suddenly you knew what to do. If I say, hey, take care of the child, you're not thinking, okay, so what does that mean? I just give the child a bubble bath. Isn't it interesting, the cognitive dissonance? Like you understand how to care for a human being, but you don't understand how to do that for yourself. Why is that? Is it maybe because you regard yourself as less than a human? You see, for us as conscious beings, like we know we have a physical body, but the actual self is not the physical body. The actual self is a metaphysical concept held in the mind. It is pure energy. And so it's easy for us to not view the self as even being anything. So we're just like, yeah, I don't count. Like, I don't count. And if you come from trauma, you may have had parents that reinforced the idea to you that you don't count by the way they acted towards you, by the way they looked at you, by the way they treated you, by the way they mistreated you, by the way they neglected you, by the way they weren't there for you, by the way they didn't come to your soccer games, by the way that they would forget to pick you up, by the way that they would forget little things and details about you that would reinforce to you this idea that you don't matter. So when someone says you, the concept of you, you're like, that's nothing. I feel nothing toward that person. I have no affinity toward them. They are nothing. And so the biggest trauma that really occurs is that you abandon yourself, is that you stop loving yourself. To go back and to heal that trauma, it's not, doesn't mean that you need to call your mom up and be like, Mom, hey, you abandoned me. I need you to stop abandoning me. Well, that's not going to work because if your mom was emotionally unavailable then, she's probably still emotionally unavailable. So it doesn't mean you need to call your dad and be like, hey, you were mean to me. Because if your dad was insensitive then, he might still be insensitive. Regardless, you don't need your parents above a certain age anymore. We want to have parents. It's nice to have parents, but we don't need them when we're not children. So you cannot seek from them what you didn't receive as a child. For instance, if you take emotions out of it, we make it something tangible. Like let's say you didn't get enough food as a kid. You just were never fed enough as a kid. This could create a mental hook in your mind that makes you feel desperate for food, right? So if a person grows up and they feel like this desperation for food, once they get to be 18, 19, they move out of their house where their parents don't feed them enough. They get their own job, they're making enough money, they go to the store, they buy a ton of groceries, and now they always have food. But what happens mentally? Sometimes it can still be there, that old thought, right? That old feeling of like, oh my God, I feel like I don't have enough food. I feel afraid that I won't have enough food, right? Sometimes that can happen to a person if they had that neglect, they had that trauma in their childhood. But how do they solve it? Is it by going back to their parents' house and saying, hey, is there any food here? No. Is it by eating more than the normal amount that an adult needs now to make up for what you didn't get as a child? No. The way that you heal that wound is by achieving the proper balance for an adult right here, right now. Recognizing that now you are in control and you are no longer in that old environment, retraining your brain to care for the self properly, which is to eat food in moderation, eat food that's nutritious, and don't feel like there's a lack. Have an abundance mentality. To take care of yourself. Provide food for yourself. So now when we go back to out of that illustration to the original wound in our cases, which was the love that we didn't receive, the affection we didn't receive, the attention we didn't receive, or the wrong type of love that we received. Now we realize it's not going backwards that's going to solve it. It's recognizing right here, right now, that you no longer need your caregivers because you are an adult. And just like if you had that job and you had all that food in the house, you actually have an abundance of love, energy, time to care for the self. So now it is your responsibility to care for the self. And that is how you heal your original wound, by moderately taking care of yourself. But how do you do that? By caring for yourself the way you would care for every other person, the way you would care for a child, perhaps. Because just like that child, you are your responsibility. You are your primary responsibility. Well, for some, they feel afraid of the concept that they would have to speak up for themselves and set boundaries for themselves, realizing, okay, yeah, to take care of myself, I have to speak up. But if I do that, then people will abandon me. If I start speaking up for myself and setting boundaries for myself, then people won't like me anymore. Or my boyfriend's going to get mad, or my parents are going to disown me, or we're just afraid of the conflict that it's going to create. The reality is setting boundaries does create conflict, especially when you don't have an established history of setting boundaries, because all of the boundary crossers around you are going to be shocked when you finally actually set a boundary. They're going to be like, what? And yes, it will cause conflict. And sometimes that's our worst nightmare, isn't it? Please just ignore me. Just let me be invisible. I don't want conflict. But your fear of conflict leads your sovereign nation to get invaded again and again and again. It leads you to get taken advantage of. It leads you to feel depleted and burnt out, to feel unhappy, to experience depression and anxiety, all because you're trying to avoid a conflict. Conflicts are momentary, like that. Conflicts are a part of the existence of this universe. This is a wall behind me. You can bet if I try to go through that wall, I'm going to face a conflict. It's a conflict. It's a part of the universe. By the wall just standing still, when I try to cross it, it creates a conflict. Get comfortable with that. That's a part of life. That wall needs to be you. That needs to be your boundary. You say, bam, here's where the line is. And you let people know, there's a line right there. Tell them, there's a line right there. And what's going to happen? Sometimes conflict. Should you be afraid of that? You're just a wall. It's not your fault. It's not your fault that a conflict has ensued by you standing in your place. Does that make sense? You set that boundary. You build your house, you set your walls, you erect your barriers. And when someone comes crashing up against it, please recognize it is not your fault. That's just the laws of the universe. Be very, very comfortable with the fact that conflict has to happen. Conflict causes respect. The fact that I know that that brick wall is going to hurt so bad if I crash into it makes me respect the brick wall. Even narcissists respect firm boundaries because they don't like smashing up into brick walls because it hurts. So you must set your boundaries firmly, like brick walls that don't move. Intelligent people will walk up to your boundary, realize it's there, and they're going to back off. The unintelligent are going to try to go through it, but they don't realize how strong you can be. You make a decision, you set your boundary, and you stay firm on that boundary. Don't worry about the conflict. Stay firm through the conflict. And we'll talk about what that looks like. But first, let's talk about how you can actually communicate the boundary. How do you actually make it clear to someone what the boundary is? Well, as we discussed in the beginning of our talk here, it's just like caring for a child. And what did we establish for caring for a child? What gives you the authority to care for yourself? Well, what gave the parent the authority to care for the child is that the child needed them. Guess what? You need you. You need yourself. Who's going to care for you? You are the person who is supposed to care for you. So if you don't show up for yourself, if you don't advocate for yourself, there is no one else. No one else is coming. There's no hero on the way. It's you who has to advocate for yourself, who has to erect the brick wall and stand there firmly and say, bam, here's my boundary. So therefore, you have the authority to set boundaries. Boundaries are rules. This means you can literally make up rules anytime you want based on your comfortability. And that's totally fine. Totally fine. Doesn't have to be pre-established. You can be anywhere at any time. You can decide, you know what, I'm not comfortable, and just set the boundary. You're out, you're having coffee, a guy approaches you, hey, how you doing? You know, what's your number? Blah, blah, blah. You can decide at any time this guy has crossed the boundary. And you can just let him know very clearly. Excuse me, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Just like that. Is it mean? It's a boundary. Boundaries don't have feelings. They are what they are. It's there. Once you decide to put a wall there, that's it. As we mentioned with children, the way that you set rules is just based on what's best for the child. So you're going to know where to create a boundary based on what's best for you. It changes moment to moment, day after day. If you have the schedule, your whole day is to yourself, and then someone sends you a text message, hey, can I come over? It's boundary setting time. Maybe you didn't know exactly what you were going to do that day, but maybe part of you was kind of looking forward to having that time to yourself and not having a plan and feeling relaxed. But you feel like, is that enough reason to say no to them? Your default in the past has been to say yes. When you're setting good boundaries, your default is to say, no. You're going to make no your new default when you're setting boundaries. You can always go back and call them back and text them back later and say, hey, I know I said no before, but if you do want to come over, it's fine. But once you say yes, you obligate yourself. And then what happens? You end up feeling resentful. You end up holding a grudge, all because you didn't establish a boundary. I know you don't have anything planned today, but check in with yourself. You would handle it the same way you handle it with a child. Would you, or a person you're caring for? Would you just fill their calendar without checking with them? Would you just be like, oh, I've decided this is happening and this is happening and this, you would just crowd their calendar? No, you're going to check in with them. Hey, what do you think about so-and-so coming over? They want to come over. What do you think about that? You do the same to yourself then. Ask yourself, check in with yourself. How do I feel? Let me take a few minutes before I answer this text. I don't think I really want to. I don't want to do this. And then you let them know. Not today. Do you have to give reasons when you set boundaries? No. I don't ask the architect why you put the wall right here. It is where it is. So when you decide that the answer is no, don't tell anyone why. Get used to that. Practice not explaining. Just set your boundary. As we mentioned with a child, how can you be consistent? Or what would happen if you're not consistent with a child? Well, of course, it would be confusing. Likewise, if you're not consistent with your boundaries, So your family members one day, this is okay, the next day it's not okay, and you have no sense of consistency, it's going to be confusing to them. So establish consistent boundaries based on your inner values in life. And just like you said, you wouldn't punish a child all of a sudden for doing something that you deem to be wrong without ever having let him know that it was wrong. Likewise, don't punish the people around you when you have never explained to them what your boundary is. Don't suddenly decide, oh, you know what? This person's too much for me. And then activate fight flight. You start all of a sudden arguing, fighting with them, and they're like, what's going on? I don't understand what's happening. What did I do? But you never told them, hey, I don't like it when you don't put the toilet seat down. You never said that. You just start screaming. That's not fair. Communicate your boundaries first. Let them know what it is first. Give the warnings first. Or you just suddenly leave or you ghost the person. If you never establish, hey, I'm having a problem in this relationship, I'm feeling like this, I'm feeling like that, and you just disappear, that's not fair because you're not giving people warnings. And how do you warn people? How do you tell them where the boundary is? Well, just like with communicating with the child, you're going to use your voice. You're going to communicate calmly, kindly when possible, ultimately firmly. The most important thing is that you just got it out, even if you didn't say it perfectly. Just say it. Don't obsess about the wording. Just say it. I need you to put your dirty clothes in the hamper. It doesn't have to come out articulate. As long as they understand it, it's about the same language. It's good. You set a boundary. You let people know this is what it is. Tell them your time, energy, resources, you're the guardian of that. That's going to include your money. It's going to include your actual time in your day, your calendar, your space, your house, your room, the space that belongs to you. All of that is yours. That's under your dominion to set rules and to set boundaries on. Don't let people encroach on that. People love to encroach on your personal resources. Don't do that. Set the boundary clearly, set the boundary firmly. Your energy is yours. Don't give your energy to someone who's just a taker. You have a man or a woman in your life who's showing romantic interest in you. But you can look down the line and you can see they're in no position to marry me. I wouldn't even marry them. They're not good news. They've got all kinds of red flags. You can see all of that. So why would you give them your energy? You must set a boundary. You must say, hey, I see that you've been showing a lot of interest in me. Thank you very much. Time for me to communicate a boundary. How do I do that? Just use my words and build a wall. Say, hey, we can be friends, but as far as you touching me and making like romantic little gestures and the little sexual jokes, I'm not really comfortable with that. Just like that. That's all you got to do. You don't have to say it perfectly. You just have to say something. Once you establish that boundary, it's there. Now you hold firm to your boundary. In order to hold firm to our boundaries, we have to be willing to go fight to the end. Meaning you just stand your ground and you don't move from the boundary. And you're going to get pushed and you're going to be tested. But when that happens, you must stand firm. Even if it goes all the way to the point where you have to call the police because this person will not respect your boundary. Did you know your boundaries are protected by the law? You get to make boundaries, and if someone violates them, you get to call the police. Even if they're a family member, you can call the police and say, I have told this person again and again to respect my boundary, and they won't do it. Like right across the board, there's nothing someone can do to you that they're allowed to do without your consent. If it's your time, space, energy, body, finances, all of that stuff belongs to you. People aren't able to encroach upon it. That's why we have laws. That's why we have police. That's why we pay taxes toward keeping these institutions upheld, because those institutions uphold our boundaries. They back us up. So we get to walk around like these little sovereign people with our own little sovereign territories, having our boundaries respected. So yes, take it that far. Could you be abandoned? Well, I hope so. I hope a boundary crosser will abandon you. Don't you? Don't you want to be left alone by people that don't respect you? You would rather have no friends than to have someone who calls himself a friend but treats you as if they're an enemy. So hope they do abandon you. What if they don't like you? Well, you should hope they don't like you. Why would you want to be liked by someone you don't like? Doesn't make sense. It's actually easier when the people you don't like also don't like you. It's like it makes the whole thing so much simpler. Have you ever been liked by someone you don't like? That it's very complicated. It's a lot easier when people don't like you. Accept that. That's a part of how the universe works. Not everyone is going to like you. Accept that. Accept that. Embrace it. We're not those children anymore, so we don't have to be afraid. We don't have to live in fear of people's reactions. So let's take some examples of areas where we can think out how we can set boundaries specifically in those areas. So what if we lend someone something of ours and they don't give it back quickly enough for us? We lend someone something and they don't give it back. How can we establish a boundary there? Well, can you picture yourself calling or texting that person and just saying something? It's not even specifically about how you put all the words together. That's not important. It's just that you say something. Sometimes literally just saying something establishes a boundary. Literally, like this. If someone owes me $100 and I text them and I say, hey, what are they going to say? About 50, 60% of the time, they're going to say, hey, I know I owe you that $100. I'm going to get it to you, blah, 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 blah. Literally just saying something works. It doesn't always have to be super articulate. What about if someone's being too pushy with their affections, or they're trying to push your boundaries to have sex or something like that, maybe hugging, kissing, and you're uncomfortable with it? How can you establish a boundary? Well, what would you do if someone was encroaching upon your child? They're hugging them, kissing them, touching them, and their child was uncomfortable with it. You could see your child's uncomfortable. What would you do? Would you just stand there and be like, would you say to your child, hey, don't disappoint them. Just do whatever they tell you, okay? Would you say that to your child? Makes your stomach turn just to think of that, doesn't it? You'd probably be the first one to be like, hey, you would just say something, right? You would say something. You might physically intervene and stand in the middle of the two people. You do the same for yourself. Advocate for yourself. Maybe you don't know why you don't want this person to touch you at the moment. It's okay. Maybe you're in a relationship with the person. It's okay. Speak up. Just say something. What do I say? Anything. Just say, hey, that's something. Anything. Say, you can do that. You've already broken the ice. As soon as you open your mouth and you use your voice, you've already broken the ice. And then you might articulate something to them once you've had a moment. You might say, can you give me a second? And go and think it out, figure out, how am I feeling right now? Do I want to do this? Da-da-da. And then you might say to them, after you've had a moment to think, you give yourself 5 to 7 seconds to to articulate your thought. You might say something like, I love you and I appreciate you, but for whatever reason, I'm not feeling this right now. I'm not feeling up to this. And I see that you're looking for affection, and I do love you, but I'm just not feeling it right now. So maybe we can try this again another time. But right now I'm not feeling comfortable. Just like that. It really doesn't matter how you say it. It's not like you have to show up with a script to these situations. What you have to show up with is heart, courage. What you have to show up with is being love and dream based and not fear based. You want to focus on who you truly are and what you want to become, and not so focused on what they're going to think of you. Do you have to explain your reasons to people? No. You don't have to tell them why. You don't have to explain your reasons. There's a question here about gaslighting. Let's see if I can pull that up. How to set boundaries to prevent gaslighting. So one of the things you have to do is establish thought boundaries. So you have to protect your own thinking by reminding yourself that you don't entertain certain threats or things that go against your entire perception of reality. So, when a gaslighter is gaslighting you in a way that's obvious enough, you simply have a thought boundary, which is, I don't think outside of this box that I've created for myself, and that's to keep myself safe. So there's no way I'm going to entertain what you're saying. And the boundary line could be something like for me, if anyone tries to tell me I'm not a good person or that I don't have good motives, I don't entertain that. I don't entertain that. Why is it important to protect our thoughts, to have thought boundaries? Well, because that's what leads us into mental illness and lack of mental health, is when we can't have a good grasp of the truth or of our identity, of who we are. We lose grasp, we lose touch metaphysically. That's what leads to mental illness. When you have a very strong frame, a mental frame that you create, which is a box, which is boundaries, walls, you say, here's what I know for sure, and I stick with that, then no one can pull you off of it. So establish for yourself a very clear mental frame. And there's some things you can say. You can say to me, hey, you're imperfect, but you could never say to me, Roman, you're not a good person. You don't have good motives. It's going too far. Certain things you can say to me that are just going too far. They're just unacceptable. And I'm going to call you on it. And I'm going to tell you, what you're doing sounds like mental abuse. I'm going to tell you. And that's how I establish a boundary. I say, oh, hey, I'm happy to have this conversation, but when you attack my motives, that's not okay with me. I'm going to say it just like that. If it's someone I can't talk to, I'm stuck in the house with a narcissist, then I may keep my thought boundaries. I might tell the narcissist actually too that what the boundaries are actually. But sometimes you can just tell it to yourself and just remind yourself like, okay, I'm not going to entertain that. It's just that simple. But largely, if we're dealing with persons that are just predatory, you need to get away from them. You need to establish space, physical distance from them. Even if that's going to be to your financial disadvantage, you need to get away from mentally unhealthy, narcissistic, toxic people. These people are very dangerous to your health. And so you have to make sacrifices for your well-being. A good example, if you're living with a narcissist, let's say it's a parent or it's a spouse, and you kind of waffle like, should I really move out? I mean, I don't know. So ask yourself very simply, would you raise a child there? You have your answer. If you feel it's a safe environment to have your child in, then go ahead and stay there. But if you know you would not let a child be in this environment, then what are you doing? It's the same thing. What would you do? You say, well, I can't move out. I can't get out of this situation. I can't set this boundary. What would you do if it was a child? Oh, well, if it's a child, I would leave. I would go to a shelter. I would call a friend. I would get them out of here. Do that then. You are of equal value to every other human being, including if you were taking care of a child. You are the child you're taking care of. You are the child. It's your responsibility to care for yourself, to advocate for yourself, to protect yourself. That means escape. That means escape your jailers. Good question so far. Does anyone have any other examples that they wanted me to cover before we wrap up? For situations where you wonder how to set a boundary? Freedom?
Yes. So, what if you have already take the initiative to create these boundaries already with whatever the scenarios are for you to be able to have a healthy response going forward? And you notice the spread of people who was in your immediate and now not in your immediate any no longer have this behavior of condemning, but you are doing what is healthy. But the mindset more than one person have is of like a condemning mindset. Again, how do you continue to move forward? Because that's what I'm doing already. But what do you think in that initiative of making that drastic change? And obviously, people can see it because you're getting such a heavy response.
Right. Yeah. So it's the same point. So if you're making changes for your child and you're taking care of your child, what can you do if everyone around you is condemning you for protecting your child? You would look at them, you would shake your head, and you would continue to protect your child. Other people's thoughts and feelings are virtually irrelevant when it comes to your boundaries. Your boundaries have nothing to do with other people's thoughts and feelings. They have everything to do with your thoughts and feelings. Your thoughts and feelings. That is what your boundaries are about. Your thoughts and feelings are your precious natural resources. So protect them and focus on them. Don't worry about other people's.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great question.